I bow to the great Mahavatar Babaji, to Jesus Christ, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Shri Yukteswar Giri, and my Guru Paramhansa Yogananda. And I bow to my divine friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda. Namaste friends. Welcome to the third episode of this web series, The Path of Kriya Yoga. In this particular episode, I plan to discuss with you some of the most frequently asked questions on the path of yoga and meditation. What is Kundalini energy? What are Ida, Pingala, SUSHUMNA? What are subtle nerve channels? How do we work with them? How do we awaken Kundalini energy? Do we need to awaken Kundalini energy? So we will touch upon some of these subjects in this particular webinar. Maybe I'll do one more on the same subject. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, or you can email me and I'll be happy to address those as well. Even before talking about some of these subtler concepts of Kundalini and subtle energy, we want to set some context for what it is that we are talking about. What do we mean in the path of yoga when we say we are working with our energy body, with subtle energies in our own self? What does any of this mean? You know, right now it is the month of July and I live in California. It's a bright summer month where I live, and we all have been in isolation for quite a few months, I'd say, at this point because of the global pandemic that we are finding ourselves in. And I love to take walks or runs occasionally in nature. And these past few days I've been on these trails with huge fennel plants which had yellow flowers a couple of months ago, and now those flowers have turned into these bright fennel seeds. And I like to grab some of those fennel seeds and munch on them while I run. These are not the plants that belong to anyone, these are just out in the wild. But a couple of days ago, I was grabbing some of these fennel seeds from these plants. Fennel, for those of you who don't know, it's called saunf in Hindi. It's a seed in the anise family. It has a mildly sweet, fragrant taste to it. It's a mouth freshener. So a few days ago, I was picking some of these seeds from the plant and I was carrying them in my hand. I wanted to take some home with me. And I was noticing that this tiny little fennel seed, if it were allowed to sprout, it would grow into this huge fennel plant. Now, by looking at the seed, I would have no way to know what the plant looked like. You know, I have seen those seeds growing up, but until I came to California in the last few years, I had no idea what the fennel plant looked like. What were the leaves like? What kind of flowers it had? Was it a tree? Was it a bush? I had no idea. But all that information of what the fennel plant is supposed to be is contained in that one little seed. Now I can break open that seed, I can look as much as I want, but I will not be able to discern it with my mind. There is no way I can see it in the seed itself. But in some mysterious way, that one little seed of fennel contains all that information of what's going to come out, how the seed, given the right opportunities for expression, how it would manifest itself into this beautiful plant with these nice airy looking leaves with beautiful yellow flowers. Now, 1 in a million seeds might actually have the karma to actually express itself as a plant, but each one of those seeds has that information in it. And a fennel seed will never grow an apple tree or an orange tree. A fennel seed will only grow a fennel plant. So somehow there is a blueprint for this expression contained within that seed. What is that blueprint? How can I not see it? How can I find out what it is? Now, if we were to apply those same questions to the human body, to who we are as people, to our own egos, we can ask that same question. Where is the blueprint? What is the blueprint that is waiting to express itself through the trajectory of one human incarnation that is not all that obvious when just that sperm and ovum unite, when we are conceived, and even when we land on this earth as small little babies? It's hard to know what the life of that one little infant is going to be. But in some mysterious way, there is a blueprint. There are so many seeds of karma in that baby that will express itself. And depending on the context that the baby finds itself in, it might express differently. But there is certainly a blueprint that is specific to that one incarnation that is waiting to express itself. Now, that blueprint is our astral body. It is the subtle body that is beneath this physical body that is actually manifesting. Now, the fennel seed itself has all that information for what that plant is supposed to be, and it can express that potential if planted in soil, if watered and taken care of in the right weather conditions. So in that same way, all of us have in our astral body the blueprint for what it is that we are bringing into this world, for that potential that is waiting to be expressed. In all ways, I call it potential because there is obviously the potential for God realization, but karma can be both positive and negative, and all of that is contained within that astral blueprint in our own self. Now, what is the astral body? Can we see it? Just as you cannot see that fennel plant hidden within that fennel seed, you cannot see that astral body by just looking at the physical body. But yogis and great saints have taught us what this blueprint looks like. And in our own life, because humans are such conscious beings, when we start to work with them through the process of meditation, we become aware of these subtle energies. And in the Path of Kriya Yoga, we are actually directly working with the subtle energy that is flowing in our own energy body, in that subtle spine, and we are trying to neutralize all the seeds of karma that exist within us, so we can experience ourselves as absolute bliss, which is the true nature or the essence of our consciousness. Now, what does this energetic blueprint look like? This video is not an academic survey of what the astral body involves or all the different components of it, but we are only going to look at those aspects of it that are relevant for us spiritually and how we work with ourselves through the process of meditation. And in that sense, the first and foremost concept that is important for us to understand is the concept of duality, of the two poles of our own consciousness. And we have been looking at this concept quite a bit even in the first two episodes of the series, where we were talking about the medulla and the spiritual eye as two poles of our own awareness. How the spiritual eye here is the point, the doorway to Christ consciousness, of feeling complete unity with all of creation. And this point, the medulla, is the point where completely self-identified with the smaller self, because we are thinking about ourselves and needing to always defend and take care of our survival. So these two poles are poles of our consciousness as we understood from the human brain. And in the energy body, the two poles that we are discussing are here and at the base of the spine. So the positive pole of that expanded self-awareness is here at this point, what is called Kutastha Chaitanya in Sanskrit. And this point in English we call it Christ consciousness in the Western tradition. But it is all referring to that same fundamental idea, this point of union with everything there is, of perfect peace, of complete self-realization and piercing all veils of limiting self-identities. This is the positive pole that exists in our own consciousness, and the negative pole exists at the base of the spine and below the coccyx center. We will talk about the Kundalini energy just in a bit, but these two poles, the positive and the negative pole, are the defining realities of that astral anatomy of our own energy body. And there are three subtle nerve channels that we are going to talk about which are relevant in this discussion. The three of them are Ida, Pingala, Sushumna. These are subtle energy channels. Often they are referred to as nerve channels. Do they actually correspond to physical nerves in our spinal column? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not even 100% sure. Some people say it is. But it's not as important for our discussion, because in essence what we are talking about are subtler than physical realities. All these subtle realities also have an expression or a manifestation on the physical plane, but the way we are understanding, studying and working with them is at the subtler level. So on the subtler level, we are working with three subtle energy channels, and these are called Ida, Pingala and Sushumna. We will talk about Ida and Pingala first before talking about Sushumna. Now, cosmic energy flows into our body. This ego identity, when we function as individuals, when we move through this world, when we incarnate as babies, we immediately start drawing that cosmic energy, that prana, into our body through the medulla. it's often referred to as the mouth of God, because that's the place, the point in our body through which energy flows, this cosmic energy that we call prana, or vital life force. I like to translate the word prana as vital life force, because that really is what defines us as being alive versus being a corpse. So as long as this life force is flowing within us, we do animate this body and we do function in this world. And this energy is flowing through this astral spine. So the energy flows upward through this channel called Ida, and the energy flows downward through this channel called Pingala. And just like the two poles, these two channels, Ida and Pingala, represent the duality that is within us, because when we move through this world with that limiting identity, everything that we do has a dual. Everything we feel has a dual. When we feel happy, we also have to feel sad. When we feel satisfaction, we also have to feel rejection. When we feel pleasure, we also feel pain. So we always experience life in duals. Even if it's not as clear in a short span of time, every flow of energy, whether it's positive or negative, has to be balanced out with an equal and opposite flow of energy. That is the realm of duality. So energy flowing up and down, Ida and Pingala, is what's happening all the time, and that's what is keeping us bound to this plane of duality. And why is it flowing in that way, and why is it keeping us in that plane of duality? Again, it goes back to a concept that we already discussed in one of the previous episodes. It's because this pole of that limiting self-identity is still separate from this point of Christ consciousness, from Kutastha Chaitanya. So we do function with this duality in our own consciousness, a part of us that is seeking expansion, that is seeking union with the divine, and another part of us that is limiting, that is thinking of ourselves, that is still caught in this belief, in this delusion that we are separate and we have to somehow take care of ourselves. And all negative emotions like anger, greed, jealousy, desires, all of that spring from this negative pole of limited self-identity. And pure bliss, joy, and the 8 aspects of the divine, as Yoganandaji describes them, all of these come from this positive pole of that union with all of creation. So this separation in our own consciousness, this duality that exists between the positive and the negative pole of the 6th chakra, represents itself. That tension is what creates that upward and downward flow of energy in our subtle spine. Now, it is important because this is one of the fundamental things that we work with during the process of meditation, and especially in the Path of Kriya Yoga, because this upward and downward flow of energy reflects as the flow of physical breath. It reflects in the flow of air through our own nostrils. Now, Ida and Pingala, as you're looking at the picture right now, crisscross. They're like two serpents that go, that go in circles, that sort of intertwine. They meet at certain points and then they separate out and they come back together again. That's how the energy flows in our spine. And between the 5th and the 6th chakra, here in the facial area of the human body, Ida flows on the left and Pingala flows on the right. So oftentimes we work with Ida as the breath flowing in the left nostril, and sometimes we work with Pingala as the breath flowing through the right nostril. That is why the practice of Nadi Shodhanam, or alternate nostril breathing, in the practice of yoga, in practicing that pranayam, we actually neutralize some of this. That's why it's considered an extremely effective pranayam to find the calm center within ourselves. Now, the flow of Ida and Pingala is always happening. Every breath we breathe is a sign of that flow of energy. And can you stop your breath consciously by just holding it? We cannot. There is a way for us to go breathless in deep meditation, but we cannot just do it with our own will. We cannot just hold our breath until we go breathless. Why is that? That's because Ida and Pingala are always flowing up and down. And as long as they're flowing up and down, the physical movement of air through the nostril and through the lungs also happens the same way. And we cannot stop it just by will. And how can we stop this duality? How can we unite that negative pole and dissolve it in that positive expression of the divine? And how can we bring back Ida and Pingala? Now the answer lies in the central nerve channel called Sushumna. Now, Sushumna is the channel of singularity. Ida and Pingala are the subtle energy channels of duality. When we are able to draw energy into that Sushumna, when we are able to pull that energy back from Ida and Pingala and channel it through that subtle nerve channel called Sushumna, then we are able to lift that energy completely straight through our astral spine to this point between the eyebrows, and we are able to completely dissolve all limitation. But what keeps us from doing that is all our karmic seeds, which is what we were discussing a few minutes ago. And even before I discuss that further, we have to talk about why Ida and Pingala are going in circles or winding like this, and what are these points where they meet. All these points of intersection between Ida and Pingala, those are chakras. Chakras are points where these energies intersect, and then they go in opposing direction, and then they are pulled out. Now, chakras are repositories of impressions. Next episode, I will delve more into these chakras because it is an entire subject in and of itself. There is a lot to discuss when we talk of chakras, because chakras represent the spectrum of consciousness within ourselves. They represent all the frequencies of how we express ourselves. And there is a lot of spiritual lessons that are to be learned from each chakra, and we consciously work with them both during meditation and in our daily life. So all of that I'll keep for the next episode because it's a pretty vast subject in itself. For right now, what's important for us to note and understand is that these chakras are points of intersection, and these are repositories of impressions. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras call these impressions vrittis or vortices. What are these vortices? The seeds that we are talking about are not just static entities. These are constantly whirling energies, and these energies are drawing us away from that Sushumna. They are drawing us away from the deep inner channel in our own spine. And that is why every time Ida and Pingala intersect in one of these chakras, immediately that energy is pulled out. It is sent out. It is drawn out through the senses, because the senses are what connect us to the outer world. But what is actually pulling that energy out are not objects that are outside in the world. What's drawing that energy out are vrittis or seeds of our own karma. In each chakra, we hold these impressions from the past of regrets, longings, desires, hopes, cravings, frustrations, anger, all the habit patterns that we have put energy into, as Yoganandaji said, both before and after birth, which means for many, many incarnations, and also in this particular incarnation, all those are held as energy patterns in our chakras, as impressions in our chakras. And these impressions impede the flow of energy, because these are vrittis, like I said, these are not static entities. So these swirling whirlpools of energy draw that flow of prana out. If not for these whirlpools, if not for these vrittis, we will in fact be able to neutralize the flow in Ida and Pingala, and we can have that energy flow through Sushumna, which is the subtle nerve channel, and we can in fact even dissolve that limiting identity that resides here in the medulla. But what keeps us away from doing that are all these vrittis, are all the karma held in the chakras, because of which Ida and Pingala always have to go like this. And for that same reason, anytime prana flows into the body, that prana is always drawn into Ida and Pingala. Rather than being able to completely and fully offer all that life force into that spiritual eye, into Kutastha Chaitanya, we are constantly drawn into this physical body, into this process of breathing air in and out. And that's really what keeps us from that beautiful state of breathlessness. In the autobiography, Swami Sri Yukteswar Giri says, breathlessness is deathlessness. What that means is when we are able to neutralize these two channels of Ida and Pingala, we become deathless. Not that we can keep this physical body alive forever, but we have dissolved all those vrittis, all those seeds of karma that that are constantly drawing us out into this endless cycle of birth and rebirth and death. And we completely end that cycle once and for all. That is why when we are able to reach that breathless state, we are able to have that spiritual accomplishment. We are able to offer our life force in a way that we can dissolve all these vrittis and everything that is holding us back from full God realization. Now, what is Kundalini? Where does Kundalini fit into all of this? This picture of Ida and Pingala and Sushumna and the two poles of consciousness that I was describing is incomplete without discussing this important concept of Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is cosmic energy. It is that infinite potential of the divine that resides within each one of us. But in the default state, this Kundalini energy is coiled up. It's dormant. It is often described as a serpent because it is considered coiled up beneath the base of the spine, beneath the coccyx center, the lowest chakra in our own body. And as soon as prana or vital life force flows into the body, this Kundalini energy acts like an enormous magnet, drawing it to the base of the spine. It immediately draws that energy to flow through the Ida and Pingala and to be drawn out through the senses because it is in a coiled up, dormant state. The entire spiritual path is awakening that Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy awakening is not just for tantrics or advanced yogis. All of us, no matter where we find ourselves in the spiritual path, we are trying to release that hold of that energy at the base of that spine because that is where lies the keys to our own salvation. Without releasing that Kundalini energy, we cannot make spiritual progress. But there are different ways to do it, and there are right and risky and perhaps not so right ways to do it. I'll see if I can discuss it in this episode, or I'll make another detailed episode to talk more about how to awaken and work with this Kundalini energy. The best image that I think of in my own head to understand the Kundalini energy is that of a boat anchor. So when the boat comes to the shore, when it's docked at the shore, there's this huge anchor that has to go under the soil. That's what is going to keep the boat secured there without the boat drifting away in the waters of the ocean. And Kundalini energy is that boat anchor. It's this, a ton of iron that has been plugged into the earth in order to keep that boat in its place. And that boat is this body, and we are being bound to this realm of delusion, to this realm of duality, because that enormous weight of that iron has been planted under the earth. So what are we doing on the spiritual path? We are trying to shake those chains. We are trying to release that energy. Is that simple? Not always, but we keep trying. And as we even do it gradually, we do release the hold that energy has at the base of our spine. We are able to gradually loosen that energy up. In fact, oftentimes in meditation, when we have some deep experiences, we feel the flow of Kundalini energy in our own spine. Even if that energy is not completely released, even as you shake up the boat anchor with a chain, there is some energy that is released, and it is felt in our own spine. In Jewish tradition or Sufi tradition, perhaps in both, there is a practice where people whirl, they swirl around when they perform certain rituals in their religion, and that is because it reflects that flow of that Kundalini energy. Perhaps many years ago, hundreds or thousands of years ago, they saw somebody who was mystical and who was having this experience of Kundalini awakening, and they started doing all that that person was doing as part of the ritual. So now people do it mechanically. Kundalini cannot be awakened just by whirling your body around. It has to be awakened through the process of meditation. But certainly that is one of the ways in which we feel Kundalini. So in your own meditation, if you're having experiences, if you feel a flow of energy that is going up the spine, the whirl is because that Kundalini energy that is being released is released through Ida and Pingala. And as you know, as we already discussed, Ida and Pingala swirl around the spine like that. So that's why we feel the flow of energy as a swirling motion in our own body. That's why that movement is reflecting that flow of Kundalini energy. So even any of those experiences that you have in your meditation may be because you're releasing the hold of that boat anchor. In essence, what we have to do on the spiritual path is gradually release that boat anchor, is to release and liberate that Kundalini energy so it can flow freely. And the entirety of that Kundalini energy cannot flow through Ida and Pingala. Delusion can never own that divine source of energy, that divine potential. That energy can flow in its entirety only through the subtle channel of Sushumna. So the process of releasing the Kundalini energy is also the same as the process of neutralizing the two dual currents, Ida and Pingala, and uniting them in that subtle energy channel of Sushumna. And it is the process of working our own karma, because what's holding us from getting deep into that channel of Sushumna are our own karmic seeds that are constantly pushing our energy out. And in the Path of Kriya Yoga, which is in essence what we are discussing now, we use a subtle technique, we use a pranayam technique that has been taught by Babaji and passed to us through Yogananda and other Kriya Yoga teachers. And this technique is a way of neutralizing these two currents, to bring that flow of energy closer and closer to our own deep spine in Sushumna. But this is not a process that is confined simply to meditation practice. We are trying to do this throughout our life, every moment of every day, because as Swami Kriyananda mentions in one of his writings, every time we even have a kind thought, every time we think of God, every time we help others, every time our heart is open, when our spirits are lifted in compassion and kindness and friendship and pure joy, that Kundalini energy is released a little bit. We tug on that boat anchor to pull it out. And the opposite also is equally true. Every time we have a negative thought, every time we have a negative desire, we have an emotion, we are jealous, we are greedy, we are angry, we are hateful, anytime we express those things, even for a brief moment, we push that Kundalini anchor and we secure it more deeply beneath the surface. So throughout our everyday life, we are in fact working with this cosmic energy. Compared to how enormous and intense the source of energy is, our own work might feel trivial or small, but it is anything but trivial, because these moments take care of incarnation. One of Yoganandaji's favorite quotes of mine is, take care of the moments and the incarnations will take care of themselves. And that is how we liberate ourselves. That is how we work with even something as subtle and as enormous as the Kundalini energy. We take care of the moments. We are always paying attention to what it is that we are channeling. We are offering every thought, every action up to the divine, up to this point. And we also work with this subtle energy through meditation techniques, especially the technique of Kriya Yoga, which was created for the purpose of gently and gradually lifting up this Kundalini energy, not from pushing it from below, but by neutralizing the currents in Ida and Pingala, by lifting those karmic seeds that are lodged in our own chakras, in our own spine, and offering it up into this inner fire, into that spiritual eye. And by doing so, gradually, we are conquering our own reactive process. Because this Ida and Pingala and the physical breath that we are talking about sounds rather mechanical, but it is anything but mechanical. We are experiencing it in our own lives and in our own consciousness all the time as the reactive process. Every time we are reacting to the world around us, every time you're angry, every time you're upset, every time you're excited, all those reactions that we have for the things out in this world are all reflections of that energy being drawn out in Ida and Pingala. And the way we neutralize is by neutralizing our own reactive process, by overcoming, by consciously neutralizing that reactive process. We do that both in daily life by watching our thoughts, watching what it is that we are always channeling in our own consciousness and paying close attention to that, and always lifting it up and offering it at the feet of the divine. And we also go deeper and deeper in our meditation practice, because I can tell you, both from my own little experience, but also by watching others who have practiced Kriya Yoga for decades now, that reactive process has been mastered. I mean, they still have karma to work with or work through, but they have to a large extent conquered that reactive process, conquered that emotion that always draws them out, but rather becoming a master of themselves. This process of spiritual awakening that the Path of Kriya Yoga is presenting to us is this lifelong journey of becoming a master of ourselves, becoming a master of our own consciousness and a master of our own destiny. So with that, I will end this episode. In the next episode, I plan to discuss the chakras in greater and greater detail, and I will touch upon Kundalini a little bit also in the next episode. And if I'm not done saying everything that I wanted to say, maybe I'll make one more episode exclusively on Kundalini. So until then, God bless you all.